You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with The World Today, and coming up a bit later in the programme, as South Carolina prepares to vote in the primary elections to choose the Republican Party's presidential candidate, the American journalist James Graff takes a wry look at why the former Speaker of the House of Representatives, Newt Gingrich, could still win in the state despite recent allegations about his private life.
There's a weird authenticity to Gingrich's happy hypocrisy. You don't have to like him to admire his sheer chutzpah. He barrels through his obvious contradictions with an air of infallible self-regard. His current wife, Callista, may be a home wrecker to some, but she got Gingrich to convert to Catholicism. And luckily, with that comes the remission of sins.
More on the Republicans to come. I'm joined throughout the programme by two guests. Nabila Ramdani is here. She's a Paris-born freelance journalist of Algerian descent, and she specialises in Islamic affairs and the Arab world. And Simon Cooper is on the line from Paris this morning. He's a columnist for the Financial Times and author of a number of books on football. Welcome to the programme, both of you. Simon, a question to you about one of your books on football, the most recent one, The Football Men, which came out, I think, towards the end of last year. And this was a profile, basically, of footballers all over the world.
Yeah, I'd been writing about footballers for 20 plus years, frightening to think, and I was trying to portray these men as I had a sense of what they are. So, I mean, for a start, it's the individual. What is Andres Iniesta like? What is Johan Cruyff like? But also a sort of picture of the profession, because so often we write about them and think of them as heroes or villains, as disloyal traitors to their clubs, or as these demigods, and they're not. They're ordinary men. They're craftsmen. They're very good at one thing, and it helps to think of them as what would they be like if he lived next door to you? What would Wayne Rooney be like if he was your office colleague? And that's the way I try to think of these people.
Because getting under the surface from the point of view of, in this case, you are effectively a sort of biographer, is often a good deal more revealing than when footballers choose to write books about themselves, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in the book I have a chapter reviewing footballers' autobiographies, and I think I'm the only person over the age of 8 who's read both Wayne Rooney's autobiography and Ashley Cole's. Ashley Cole's, I think, is jointly the worst book I've ever read with Badiou's Eurabia. And I felt dirty having read it. I have to say Steven Gerrard and Frank Lampard, and particularly Jamie Carragher, wrote better books. But yes, don't read footballers' books. Read my book about footballers instead.
That was kind of a cue for you to say that. Nabila, I know you travel very widely around the Arab world, and certainly have done in the last year when so much has been happening. But a trip, I think, to Egypt is coming up fairly soon.
Yes, absolutely. I have actually been to Egypt to cover the uprising this year, and I'm going back on a holiday this time, although it seems now very odd, unfortunately, to go to Egypt for a holiday, because it's not a relaxed place any longer. It's very volatile. It's still very dangerous, and in my opinion, the proper revolution has only just started, where the people are now trying to get rid of the overwhelming presence of the army in state affairs. And but it's very good for me to go there and just have a feel of what it's like, and not do particular work.
Mind you, I find it hard to imagine that particularly you, can go to somewhere like Egypt and regard it entirely as a holiday.
Yes, you're right. You're quite right. I don't know. I just, when things like that are happening, and it's life-changing for most Arabs in the region, I just can't sit back and go on, on a cruise, for example.
Well, enjoy your time there when it comes. If you have any thoughts on anything you hear from either Simon or Nabila, world have your say at bbc.com. That's our email address, or you can send an SMS message to us via your mobile phone. The number for that, 447786 20 60 80. In Nigeria, the organisers of an anti-government rally set for this morning in the commercial capital Lagos have called off the event following Friday's bomb attacks in the north of the country. The explosions at police stations and other government facilities in Kano killed at least 6 people. Well, our World Affairs correspondent Mark Doyle was in Kano until a few hours before the blasts took place and sent us this report.
Inside the palace of the Emir of Kano, the most powerful Islamic leader in Nigeria's mainly Muslim north. As the Emir passes by, resplendent in flowing white robes, praise singers shout their homage. and palace musicians with long silver horns greet their leader. I had an audience with the Emir 3 days ago, well before the wave of bomb blasts.
How are you, sir?
He's a deeply conservative traditional leader with completely different attitudes and opinions compared with the radical Islamist sect Boko Haram. I asked the Emir, without citing Boko Haram by name, because I'd been told that if I did, my interview might be abruptly curtailed, about the Islamist sect that was causing waves in northern Nigeria.
Your Highness, does the fact that these more radical groups, and we all know who they are, attacking police officers and telling Christians to leave and so on, these more radical groups in northern Nigeria, does the fact that they exist and that they're operating mean that you've to some extent lost control of the situation?
So ai gwamnati tana kokari amma kuma kokari kadai.
His Highness Emir Kano preached to his people to live in peace, to embrace peace, and even the perpetrators are being told of the tenets of Islam, which does not allow provoking anybody or doing anything bad to anybody. So it is what His Highness is always telling his subjects, to embrace peace and live peaceably with one another.
This was a reference to the tensions between Christians and Muslims in Nigeria. The most populous nation in Africa is split between a mainly Christian south and an Islamic north. Boko Haram's main target is the Nigerian police, largely because they accuse the police of killing their leader while he was in police custody. The coordinated attacks on Kano police stations on Friday looked like they could be one of the most serious onslaughts so far. But the Boko Haram sect also attacks Christian churches. On Christmas Day, it bombed a church near the national capital, Abuja, killing 38 people. I reached a Boko Haram spokesman, Abu Juyeya, by phone. This interview again was before yesterday's bomb blasts. But here's a flavour of what Boko Haram says it stands for and why it is fighting.
The Christmas Day bombing? They are not innocent people.
Why are they not innocent? I don't understand how churchgoers at a church ceremony on Christmas Day can be anything other than innocent people.
They are not innocent. Why did they kill Muslims in the city of Jos? They killed Muslims on Eid al-Fitr. They killed Muslims in a mosque in Jos last year. Nobody said anything about that. Just the way America and its allies are attacking Muslims wherever they are, irrespective of who they are and how good they are.
A Christian church in Kano. Large numbers of Christians live here, even though it's a majority Muslim city. They're mostly traders who originally come from mainly Christian southern Nigeria. Before yesterday's attacks, some Christian and Muslim leaders in Kano were reaching out to one another to try to calm religious tensions. A Muslim cleric visited a Christian church to speak about how Jesus and Mary are in the Quran too.
Also, Allah the Exalted said about the miraculous birth of Jesus Christ.
It was a well-meaning initiative, and I know from visiting this country for over 20 years that most Nigerians, whether Christian or Muslim, want desperately to live in peace with their neighbours. But the multiple bomb blasts in Kano now dominate the agenda. Fear and suspicion will return.
Mark Doyle reporting from Nigeria. You're listening to The World Today from the BBC World Service. Voters in the US state of South Carolina get their chance in just a few hours' time to have their say in the race to be the Republican Party's presidential candidate. But as they battle it out, President Obama doesn't seem to be taking much notice. He added an unexpected flourish to his speech at a campaign fundraiser in New York.
And then to know that Reverend Al Green was here. So in love with you.
They liked it. Back in South Carolina, 4 Republican hopefuls remain in the running. One of them, Newt Gingrich, seems to be winning people round, despite the most recent allegations about his private life. James Graff, the executive editor of the US edition of The Week magazine, tries to explain why.
Talk about a topsy-turvy world. Republicans vote for their presidential candidate today in South Carolina, one of the most religiously conservative states in the U.S. And they're surging toward a thrice-married adulterer whose previous wife claimed this week that he'd sought an open marriage so he could carry on with the current one. Just how is Newt Gingrich beating that rap? The short answer? He's a crafty operator who knows exactly what buttons to push, especially in the American South. When the ex-wife question came up right at the start of Thursday night's debate in Charleston, there was no aw shucks apology from Gingrich. He played offense. He knows that among conservative South Carolinians, adultery doesn't rate nearly as high in the catalog of evils as the encroaching forces of liberalism. So he launched his fury at the elite media protecting Barack Obama from attacking Republicans, and the crowd went wild. So, does Newt Gingrich have no shame? He does not. And this week, at least, that's precisely his advantage over Mitt Romney, who seems to have plenty of it. The multimillionaire frontrunner hesitated when asked to reveal his tax returns, which are likely to detail his holdings in the Cayman Islands and other matters the masses might resent. He's also backed away from large parts of his record as Massachusetts governor, where he reformed medical insurance and, horror of horrors, worked well with Democrats. So when Romney said during Thursday's debate that he was not going to apologize for being successful, it somehow sounded as if he was doing just that. There's a weird authenticity, on the other hand, to Gingrich's happy hypocrisy. You don't have to like him to admire his sheer chutzpah. He barrels through his obvious contradictions with an air of infallible self-regard. His current wife, Callista, may be a homewrecker to some, but she got Gingrich to convert to Catholicism, and luckily with that comes the remission of sins. But Gingrich's charm works only as long as he can play the insurgent, just as Herman Cain's did as recently as last month. If he pulls off a win in South Carolina, and polls there are historically so inaccurate that predictions are foolish, he'll still fight an uphill battle to get the nomination. There's a reason why the Republican establishment gets jittery around Gingrich. He may light up hardcore conservatives, but that's not where elections are won. It's independents who will decide the presidency in 2012. That's why Obama worries far more about facing the wooden but predictable Mitt Romney than about a mercurial political firecracker whose next blow-up could backfire.
James Graff with his latest thoughts. Simon Cooper, you were an admirer of the chutzpah of Newt Gingrich.
I mean, he is a funny presence. He does make politics a bit less dull. Of course, one blanches at the thought of the man with his hand on the nuclear button, because he might touch it just for fun in the spirit of scientific experimentation, which he also enjoys. I mean, what strikes me about this Republican race is how people really now care about the economy rather than anything else. And so Mitt Romney, even in the Republican primaries, is in trouble for being a rich businessman who sacks a lot of people and for having made these hundreds of millions of dollars. Whereas in 2008, when he ran, the focus was on his being a Mormon. And you see, as your correspondent said, that Gingrich's adulteries don't really hurt him this time around, just as Romney's Mormonism doesn't hurt him, because voters are focused on their economic pain. That's what it's about this time.
So, Nabila, it's the economy, stupid.
Well,
somebody once famously said.
Absolutely. I mean, Christians definitely seem full of forgiveness as far as Gingrich's baggage, if I may put it that way, is concerned. But remember, they didn't forgive Bill Clinton or Kerry, who were both Democrats. So they probably see in Gingrich somebody who could represent them better than a wealthy multi-millionaire in a context of dire economic context. But I think what it shows more is that the division within the Republican Party and the lack of unity and the difficulty of finding a leader.
It's a subject we will no doubt return to on this programme and plenty others between now and November. 21 minutes past 8 GMT. Africa's premier football tournament, the Cup of Nations, gets underway later today with the hosting shared between two small West African countries, Gabon and Equatorial Guinea. Both hope the event will raise their international profiles. But the choice of Equatorial Guinea as co-host is not without controversy. The country's human rights record is among the worst in the world, according to the US think tank Freedom House, and others say similar things. Ian Birrell recently visited Equatorial Guinea with a group of British members of Parliament. Ian's a foreign correspondent, campaigner and co-founder of Africa Express, which brings together African and Western musicians. Ian, welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much.
What was your impression of Equatorial Guinea?
It's a strange and fascinating country that has, on the surface, poured its oil money. It's got huge amounts of oil money for a small country. It's very wealthy, and it's poured it into some facilities which give it a facade of illusory change and transformation. But scratch a little bit beneath that, and you see a country which remains very, very impoverished, where, despite per capita wealth that exceeds Britain, 3/4 of its people live on less than $1 a day. And it still has terrible things like infant mortality and gross poverty. And it's said by some to be perhaps the most unequal society in the world, with this incredibly wealthy, small elite based around the ruling family and grinding poverty for most people.
How free were you to explore the country as you wanted while you were there?
Well, I was in quite a strange situation because I was invited as a guest of the president as part of this parliamentary delegation. I don't think they were aware that I was a journalist. And so I had perhaps more freedom than most journalists have. Indeed, one guy I went off for a walk with said, was I sure I wanted to go with him, one of the opposition figures? And I said, yes, why? And he said, well, the last people got arrested, picked up, had all their films scratched out and deported, a German TV crew. But I was able to sneak off and wander around a bit because of having this slightly special way of being there, and was able to talk to people.
In the previous hour of the programme, we talked about the actual football tournament that's about to start. So I want to bring both Simon and Nabila in as they listen to you with perhaps some thoughts on your visit and what you saw. Simon, maybe a question to Ian or a thought of some sort?
Ian, what impact do you think the football tournament is going to have on the life of ordinary people there?
I think it's always slightly difficult to wonder about the impact of sport. On one level, people there, like most parts of Africa, adore football, and it's very exciting. It's a fantastic tournament. And it is something which will, sports tournaments, as I think you've written, tend to cheer up nations. So on one level, there's a benefit to it. On the other side, it is part of an attempt to change the image of a country that's been called one of the world's worst countries, along with places in terms of the way it treats people, in terms like North Korea, like Somalia. And it's an attempt to improve the image of the country.
Can I just say something about that? Because dictators often think if we host a sports tournament, it will improve our image. But often it backfires because we now have you on the programme telling us about the truly horrible situation there. Often the sports tournament is a way for the media to talk about the country and to describe all the terrible things that happen.
I think that's very true, and it's of course lots of journalists will be going there, most of them to report on football, but a few I'm sure will get off and talk to some of the people I spoke to who have been tortured and had their lives ruined by the regime, and I think that's very true. Equally, however, they're very smart, the people running the country, and I'm sure they'll roll back a lot of the security. When I was there, I noticed that the day after the MPs left, there were far more police on the streets, and the atmosphere changed quite dramatically.
Nabila?
Yes, so I have a question. In fact, how can we practically try to take advantage of such an event to try and press for the promotion of human rights?
Well, I think in a way, as Simon said, the good thing is that a lot of people aren't familiar with Equatorial Guinea. It's a very small country, and until it got oiled, it's not one that attracted much attention. And I think this does give an opportunity to put the spotlight on the country and to appreciate quite how grotesque the corruption is. I mean, you have the son of the president was said by the American government to have spent in 3 years double the amount of money that the entire public sector has spent on it. And that was just on things like he was trying to buy yachts and planes and all this sort of stuff. And he's a collection of Michael Jackson memorabilia. So I think one advantage we have is to shine the spotlight on it and for people to understand what's going on and to talk about it.
I was struck, Ian, reading the piece that you wrote which described your visit, and I read it last evening. The extraordinary contrast between what you witnessed as soon as you left the airport, having been met by clearly officials in limousines, and what you eventually managed to see by way of the poverty in the country.
Yeah, I mean, this is what's so incredible about the place, is the efforts they're going to present this facade of normality. You drive from the airport down this fantastic brand new 3-lane motorway, and there's no cars on it. There's huge hundreds of new flats, office buildings, a brand new luxury, incredible hotel, a conference centre that costs, I think it was $800 million. And it's all a complete Potemkin village, a fake thing designed to show off the country. Ordinary people can't get there. And in fact, when you stay in the hotel, the one problem with it is you can't get a taxi into town.
And there was even, I think there was a hospital that you saw at one point which clearly wasn't really functioning as well, is that right?
Yeah, it's an incredible brand new hospital, which is really just for the very, very top of the country, although they pretend otherwise. And a doctor there said they only had one patient in the previous month, and this in a place with some of the worst infant mortality in the world. And it just sort of symbolises in many ways what's happening there.
And just one final thought to you, because the other thing that struck me when I was reading your account was the effectiveness or otherwise of groups of parliamentarians, in this case a group from Britain, being invited to a country like this as guests of the president. What realistically can a group like that achieve?
I think in a curious way it ended a bit like, again, Simon said earlier, they were invited there and they were shown all these lovely brand new facilities, but they gradually, as the trip went on, despite the facade they were being shown, they began to see what was really going on, and it backfired. And actually, again, it ended up attracting a little more attention, but of the negative rather than positive variety for the country.
Interesting. Ian, thank you very much for coming on the programme. Ian Birrell, foreign correspondent, campaigner and co-founder of Africa Express. As I say, we were talking extensively about the football element to the Africa Cup of Nations in the previous hour. That's the political element, coverage no doubt of both here on the BBC World Service in the coming weeks. You're listening to The World Today. More to come in the second half of the programme from both Nabila Ramdani and Simon Cooper. Our headlines are coming up in just over a minute's time.
London Calling from the BBC. With the whole world's attention on London in 2012.
To the city of London.
When he said London, everyone just went nuts, so it was just a brilliant feeling.
The BBC is focusing on a city getting ready to host the Olympic Games.
We're barely counting in weeks and months now, so it's close.
With a unique insight into the history, culture and population, we have programmes throughout the year with a London perspective. We take an inside look at the city's preparations and at the hopefuls looking for glory in 2012.
If I fully commit and give it 100%, I think I've got a real chance of getting in the team.
London Calling from the BBC. On radio, on TV and online.
Every week we tackle the issues and examine the big stories affecting the planet's most popular game. Sign up for the World Football Podcast at bbcworldservice.com and you won't miss a kick.
It's 8:30 GMT. This is The World Today from the BBC World Service. Still to come, the thoughts of the Syrian poet Adonis on the latest events in his home country. Is Sharia law compatible with human rights and British law? And why historians are less than happy with inaccuracies in the popular primetime TV drama Downton Abbey. That's all here on The World Today. Now the latest world news.
BBC News. The organisers of a big anti-government rally planned to take place today in Nigeria's largest city, Lagos, have cancelled the event. Their decision came in response to coordinated bomb attacks on Friday in the northern city of Kano, which killed at least 6 people. The militant Islamist group Boko Haram said it was responsible. Scientists at leading bird flu laboratories who created a more easily transmitted strain of the disease have agreed to suspend their research for 2 months over fears it could be used by terrorists. The researchers called for an international forum to debate the risks and benefits. The British government is increasing funding to fight what are known as the neglected tropical diseases. It's part of a global push to bring more attention to diseases such as river blindness, elephantiasis and Guinea worm. The Cuban government has defended its treatment of a political dissident who died on Thursday after 2 months on hunger strike in jail. Officials said the prisoner Wilman Villar was admitted to hospital from prison a week ago, and they listed a wide range of medical treatment he'd been given. American Republican Party candidates are fighting it out today in South Carolina in the third of the series of presidential primary elections. The favourite for the candidacy, Mitt Romney, a Mormon, is facing his first vote in a conservative southern state made up largely of evangelicals who don't recognise his religion as Christian. Bolivia has signed an agreement with the United States and Brazil to help reduce the production of illegal cocaine. The US and Brazil will provide funding and technical assistance, including satellite monitoring of coca leaf cultivation. Africa's premier football tournament, the Cup of Nations, gets underway later today, with a hosting shared between 2 small Western African countries, Equatorial Guinea and Gabon. Both hope the event will raise their international profiles and cement their links with the rest of Africa. BBC News.
You're listening to the BBC World Service. I'm Julian Warwicker with The World Today. With me throughout the programme, Nabila Ramdani, Paris-born freelance journalist of Algerian descent who specialises in Islamic affairs and the Arab world, and Simon Cooper, columnist for the Financial Times, author of a number of books on football, and he is with us in Paris. Now, at the age of 82, he is one of the Arab world's most celebrated poets. Born Ali Ahmed Said Asbar, but writing under the rather catchier pseudonym of Adonis, he was one of the most prominent and critical Syrian voices long before the term Arab Spring came along. Having served a 6-month jail sentence as a political prisoner, he spent the last 50-odd years outside his home country, living and writing in France and in Lebanon. Well, I spoke to him this week on the line from Paris and asked him how he feels as he watches the current events in Syria unfold on the news.
شعوري مزدوج أولا الشعور القريب وهو
When I watch the pictures coming from Syria and when I read the articles in the papers, I have mixed feelings. My first feeling is what is happening in Syria is against humanity, it's against human feelings, it's against human dignity. My second feeling is that I am inherently against violence. But throughout history, our part of the world has been suffering from violence, as has been the rest of the world. But the rest of the world moved on and it got rid of the violence element. But unfortunately, we are still suffering from violence.
If you were in Syria now, would you be out protesting?
أنا ولو لم أكن عمليا في سوريا أنا أعايش الأوضاع في سوريا.
Although I am not in Syria, but I live what is going on in Syria. I was one of the first to write about what's happening in Syria. And I was the first one to call for a halt to the violence and to stopping the bloodshed. Violence that's happening in Syria now is coming from all parts and from all sides. And this violence should be halted.
Would you be prepared to go out onto the streets and protest against the Assad government?
أعتقد نعم مع فارق كبير.
Yes, definitely I would. I would go to the street and protest, but with one difference. I will not use a religion as a political tool. I will not go to the mosque to pray and then go to the street to demonstrate. Using religion as a political tool is in itself a sort of violence against the others.
And because you believe in peaceful resistance, what do you say to the protesters who have tried peaceful means and are then faced with violence? What are they supposed to do?
I would remain a believer in non-violence. I am a supporter of Gandhi against Che Guevara. If you use violence to convince the other side, you have actually defeated your own beliefs.
But to be clear, your message to President Assad is that he should step down.
Yes, I have written about this in the past.
I want to ask you about your poetry. Have you found yourself drawn to writing poems inspired specifically by what's happening inside Syria now?
One cannot use poetry to describe what's going on or to write about what's going on the field. It's the other way around. What is going on in the field is the tool for poetry. But poetry cannot be used as a tool for any political means.
Can a writer, can a poet influence the way a political struggle develops, though?
I don't think so. Even Shakespeare did not manage to influence the British struggles and political battles. Therefore, poetry and art cannot influence people at the end of the day, but one bullet influences a whole lot more.
What is your hope for the outcome of the current unrest in Syria?
Genuine change cannot happen just by removing the regime. It can happen by implementing the following: a complete separation between what is religious and what is political, cultural and social. We cannot have a revolution based on religion. Number two, there should be a declaration for a full emancipation of women from religious constraints. Number three, we cannot accept any foreign intervention, be it military or otherwise.
Do you have one poem or part of one poem, Adonis, that you would like to read at this point that is relevant to the conversation we've been having?
ذلك الطفل الذي كنت أتاني مرة وجها غريبا لم يقل شيئا مشينا وكلانا يرمق الآخر في صمت خطانا نهر يجري غريبا جمعتنا باسم هذا الورق الضارب في الريح الأصول وافترقنا غابة تكتبها الأرض وترويها الفصول أيها الطفل الذي كنت تقدم ما الذي يجمعنا الآن وماذا سنقول.
The poetry of Adonis talking to me from Paris a couple of days ago. That poem, I'm told, was about a meeting between the poet and a small child, the future they aspire to, and what they decide to do to achieve a better way of life. Although, Nabila, I'm guessing that you probably understood the words better than I did.
Yes, absolutely. He used metaphors, of childhood, but also talking about using natural comparisons like a river flowing and leaves being blown in the wind to make his point.
What do you think of the point he made about peaceful protest and how much he still thinks that that is an important part of what is going on in Syria?
I think it's an important point to make because the demonstrations that are going on, that are still going on after 10 months of repression, are largely peaceful, and the government's attempt is to desperately try to blame terrorist groups for the violence. And that's an attempt to hijack, in fact, the what is essentially a peaceful message towards the regime, to ask for a change of regime, essentially.
But maintaining a peaceful approach to protesting, if you are faced with violence, requires extraordinary courage, doesn't it?
Very much so, and there are elements of violence which have emerged in Syria, undoubtedly so. And the Free Syrian Army is now based in Turkey and is trying to organise itself to fight the regime. It appears to be a dislocated movement, and it depends on local authority rather than a more coordinated and efficient army, as we are told.
A word about the Arab League delegation. What are your thoughts on what that has done so far and whether it is actually playing a meaningful role in this?
Well, the United Nations Security Council is awaiting a report by the observers of the Arab League, who spent 10 days, I believe, in the country now. And critics are already saying that it's a pretty toothless a group of observers, that the report will be inefficient. And I was able, in fact, to interview Anwar Malik, who was part of the Arab League group, and he told me last week when I interviewed him in Paris that the regime resorted to intimidation and threatened him with death for criticizing the increasingly murderous tactics used by the regime, and he had to flee Syria to protect his life. And he said that any negative comments were ignored, and the authorities tried to blackmail the whole observer mission into keeping what they saw as a secret. And what they saw was actually quite overwhelming, as they watched men, women and indeed children being slaughtered and tortured.
Simon Cooper, how does this look from Paris?
I mean, I hugely sympathise with what Adonis says about peaceful resistance, but I don't think it's true in the case of Syria. I mean, the icons of passive resistance, Gandhi, Martin Luther King, were fighting against democracies. That's the key point. The US, even the British Empire, were open to reason, didn't want to use violence forever. And so they said, okay, you're right. It doesn't work with tyrants. I mean, Hitler could never understand why the British Empire didn't just shoot Gandhi and shoot all the Congress leadership in India and be done with the problem. And that's the way tyrants think, and they laugh at peaceful resistance.
So the assumption being on the part of those who conduct peaceful resistance with the intention of it achieving something is that there has got to be some moral understanding of that on the part of those you are opposed to.
Moral understanding, but also democracies don't function very well by having very long-term repression. They start to get internal arguments. The repression starts to spread from repressing one particular group to repressing everyone. The democracy starts to malfunction. And so they like to get out of those situations if they can, just as the Brits eventually got out of Northern Ireland, got out of India, because it's not a happy place to be. That might be what will prompt Israel to solve the Palestinian situation, because Israel is internally still a democracy. It doesn't want to be that kind of state that represses. Assad, I mean, that's what he does. That's his business.
What now for Syria, Nabila, in your estimation?
Well, just a quick point about, what Simon is saying. I don't think that democracies are necessarily more reasonable, as we've seen in the case of Libya, where Britain, for example, used the British special forces on the ground, which was highly illegal. And this idea that dirty wars can actually engender democracy is wrong. So I don't think there's a case to say that, mature Western democracies do not resort to dirty tactics.
They do resort to dirty tactics, but it's very hard for them to stay internally within their own state for long. I mean, sure, they can go to a foreign country and do horrible things, but internally you start to get people getting very angry and saying those things in the media and making a fuss, and that's why it's hard for them to do it for a long time.
Well, Iraq is precisely a counter-example of that, because we're talking about a decade.
Yes, Britain and the US can go to foreign countries and do nasty things. It's much harder for them to do that kind of thing internally, which is what Martin Luther King and Gandhi, British Empire, rule over India, are examples of.
I'm going to leave your disagreement at that point because I want to get on to another topic. A special report from the BBC's Asian network this week found that the use of Sharia or Islamic law in the UK is rapidly increasing. In some cases, even non-Muslims have begun using Sharia courts to settle disputes. Sheikh Haitham Al-Haddad is a representative of the Islamic Sharia Council in the UK.
Compared to 5 years ago, the number of cases that we've been receiving now has been tripled. We have at least 300 cases on a monthly basis. Muslims in general now are going back to their faith, and they would like to be more faithful to their religion. And because of this, they would like to resolve many of their disputes according to Islam.
Well, despite the popularity of these Sharia courts, the judgments in them are not legally binding in the UK. But in an article in the Guardian newspaper this week, Sadakat Kadri, a British criminal barrister, argued that Sharia law is compatible with human rights and UK law, and he is with us. Welcome to the programme.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you very much for coming in. For those who are not entirely clear what we're talking about, first of all, let's make sure we know Sharia law and what we are actually defining here.
Well, there's an important distinction actually between the Arabic word Sharia and the Arabic word fiqh. Sharia basically means the path, the correct path, the path towards salvation. Fiqh is the human attempt to approximate God's divine law. And so there's a fundamental problem in the debate that takes place around these so-called Sharia courts, which is that people associate the justice that they're dispensing, that they claim to dispense, with the worst interpretations of divine law that have taken hold, particularly since 9/11, but really over the last 30, 40 years. And we all know what kind of interpretations we're talking about: capital apostasy, stoning for adultery, etc., etc. That's got nothing to do with these courts. These courts are basically conciliation and arbitration tribunals. You said in the introduction that they're not binding in UK law. In fact, certain decisions are binding to the extent that if the parties agree beforehand that their decisions will be binding, then the court will uphold those decisions. But that's subject to a very, very important caveat, which is that they don't have jurisdiction, for example, in matters involving the rights of children. They don't have jurisdiction in matters involving ancillary relief after divorce. So, in other words, a man can't simply abandon his wife and give her maintenance according to 7th century standards. They certainly don't have any jurisdiction in criminal matters. What they do is, just as is the case with every other religious minority in this country, they say that if people voluntarily want to have their decisions, if people are devout and voluntarily want to have their disputes resolved according to religious law because they think that that's the way to attain salvation, then they should be allowed to do that.
How much greater sway should they have, do you believe, in Britain?
It's not for me to say how much they should. I think that anyone who voluntarily wants to participate in these courts should have the right to do that. I can't say any more than that.
Well, the reason I asked that question is because obviously, having read the article that quoted you in the Guardian this week, I was struck, as no doubt you were, by the comments of the president of the National Secular Society, Terry Sanderson, who said, and I quote, "I regard any legal system based on a theocratic model as being dangerous and innately unjust."
Sure. No, my point in that article was that it's very important that these tribunals be recognised, be acknowledged, because if they aren't, then these decisions are still going to take place. People aren't going to stop being religious, and people aren't going to stop taking their decisions to mullahs and muftis in mosques. It's just that these decisions will then not be subject to British law in the same way. They won't be challengeable by way of judicial review. They won't be subject to the Human Rights Act, which almost certainly these decisions are. It hasn't actually been tested yet, but they're almost certainly going to be regarded as subject to the Human Rights Act if it were to come to the test. And the real reason why these tribunals should be extended to a certain extent is because it encourages the judges, it encourages the religious scholars in these tribunals to come up with interpretations of the Sharia which are compatible with human rights. I'm not saying that all interpretations are. I'm saying that there are interpretations of the Sharia which can be compatible, and those are the ones which should come to the fore.
I want to put some views to you that we've had from people listening to the programme, because we floated this on our Facebook page, and you won't be surprised to hear that it's prompted quite a lot of debate. But Nabila, first of all, perhaps a thought from you, a question maybe.
Yeah, well, I think, from my understanding, Sharia law is already incorporated in UK law in some respect. For example, when you talk about British food regulations, it allows meat to be slaughtered according to Jewish or indeed Islamic practices. And secondly, the Treasury, I think it already has been approved that Sharia-compliant financial products such as mortgages or investments are incorporated in UK law, but not all Sharia is incorporated in full in British law. And I think perhaps what Muslim women have expressed some concern about issues like marriage, for example, where it's important in Muslim communities to be married according to be religiously married, but that often means that they're not protected by British law, and they would like to encourage perhaps imams in mosques to push for them to be protected by British law and push for civil marriage as opposed to just a religious marriage.
Yeah, on the first point, yes, you're right. Of course, halal meat is permissible under British law. It's a certain aspects of Islamic finance are completely not just permissible, but also popular within the Muslim community. The problem there is that that's not really, when people talk about Sharia law, that isn't what they think about in this country. They don't imagine Sharia to involve that, really. They invariably think about repressive criminal punishments and discrimination against women, etc., etc. But yes, you're completely right on the first point. On the second point, yes, well, I'll take that point generally. I mean, there's an issue. There's certainly discriminatory provisions that the Sharia can be regarded as validating, but there are also other interpretations which can also be validated. Those are the ones which need to come to the fore. Of course, no one's supporting, or I'm certainly not supporting, discriminatory rules being enforced by these Sharia tribunals. But the Sharia tribunals are effectively they've been operating for 30 years in this way. They're effectively Muslim marriage guidance councils. They operate in order to get couples who are having disputes to resolve their disputes without the problem of going to court.
Simon, I just wanted to bring you in Paris, perhaps with a thought as well about whether or not, or how, if it were to happen, this debate might be going down where you are in Paris.
Well, France doesn't recognise religious decisions as law. I mean, for example, you're welcome to get married religiously in a religious ceremony in France, but it has no legal status. The only legal status is when you go to the town hall and sign the right documents. And I have great sympathy with that, because I think the problem with having these religious courts is that you are saying, say that you're a Pakistani origin woman living in Britain, you believe in Islam, but you are a citizen of Britain and you should have the rights to be judged in any situation under British state laws, which are written down largely, and not to, just because of your ethnicity, be taken into some tribunal, which people say, oh, well, that applies to you, you're a Pakistani origin, and have somebody do his own interpretation of Sharia on you and infect your life. I think the role of the state should be to protect people from their ethnic origins if they want to say, you are not a member of a community, you are a citizen with citizens' rights. And I think using phrases like the Muslim community, the Jewish community, I think is very dangerous, because it says to people, because of your birth, that is where you belong, and those are the people who will judge you. Well, maybe they don't want that, all of them.
Siddhartha, a chance to come back on that.
Sure, well, that's the hyper-secular perspective of France, which fair enough, that operates in France. I'm not going to get involved in that specific national debate. But the crucial thing, and again, it's happened despite the way that I tried to present the case, that I've tried to present the case over the last 5 minutes. No one's talking about dragging women into court against their will. This is only if they're voluntarily going to these courts. And if you're going to say no, that shouldn't happen for Muslims, then you're either going to say we're going to have to discriminate against Muslims, or you're going to say this shouldn't happen for any religious community in the country. It's been happening. Well, fine, but it's been happening with the Beth Din for Jews in this country for more than a century.
Okay, I'm going to have to end you there, but thank you very much for coming in. I will just air some of those comments I promised I would. On both sides of the debate, Taran Sanders says it's a slippery slope indeed. Cindy Shah says Sharia law, no, it's far too extreme. But then you get this. Nisa Ahmed Shenwari writes, let's be frank and accept that we have some or many discrepancies in Sharia law, but you should also accept there are some or many good laws. We do not want complete Sharia, except those laws which are compatible with human rights, and feel no hesitation to reject laws which are against human rights. As I say, that debate is going on our Facebook page, and it's been one of the livelier ones we've had on this programme in recent weeks. You're listening to The World Today. It's now 6 minutes to 9 GMT, and time for a change of mood, I think.
Why do we have to help ourselves at luncheon?
It's a Downton tradition. They have their feast at lunchtime and we have ours in the evening.
But why can't they have their lunch early and then serve us, like they normally do?
Because it's Christmas Day.
It's not how we'll do it at Haxby.
Which I can easily believe.
A snippet there from the opening to the Downton Abbey Christmas special. This, if you haven't seen or heard of it, is the British period drama that won 4 Golden Globe Awards earlier this week. And in that scene, we heard the character Sir Richard Carlisle complaining about the servants getting a day off for Christmas. But just how accurate is the show's portrayal of the relationships between the British upper classes and their servants? Well, this week, British historian Simon Sharma tore into the, quote, historical inaccuracies of the show. He went so far as to describe it as cultural necrophilia. Historian Jennifer Newby is a Downton doubter as well. Fair comment?
I wouldn't go as far as Simon Sharma, but yes, I think he's got a point there.
Right. What's wrong about it?
For me, when watching Downton, it's the relationships between the upper classes and their servants. For instance, at the beginning of Series 2, one of the girls is learning to cook, and the butler says to the lady of the house, "Oh, I don't approve of this at all." He just wouldn't have said that sort of thing.
Nabila, you've been watching this, haven't you?
Yes, absolutely, and I'm a historian by training, but I still enjoyed Downton Abbey enormously, so they can't be doing everything wrong. But it's very true. I mean, we're dealing with fictional entertainment essentially, and so historical rigor doesn't always fit in, and that's the main thing. And I agree with Jennifer. I think the cozy relationship between the master and ladies of the house with the servants is barely believable. I mean, they discuss everything from political views to personal issues, and they look too shiny as well. They would have been a pretty grubby lot, for Edwardian servants as well.
True.
Yeah, definitely. One servant's memoir that I read said, I was told I smelled, which is probably true because I wasn't allowed to use the bathroom.
Simon, has this reached France, Downton Abbey?
I don't think the French are very preoccupied by it, although the French...
I fancied not, no.
But like the whole world, they share this obsession with British pre-war aristocrats, and it seems that everybody in the world wants to be reborn as one, even though the real lots, were died in wars and weren't very hygienic and had bad teeth. So it was a lot of... it wasn't all joy if you were an aristo. Jennifer,
just picking up the point that Nabila was touching on, ultimately this is fiction. Does it matter?
Not really. I think for me, the point of the show is that it's getting people interested in the period and perhaps looking into their own ancestry and finding stories about servants that they're related to.
And that's the point, I suppose. If they are then going to look into their history, your argument would presumably be that you like that history to at least have a vein of accuracy to it.
Well, I think the truth is just so much more interesting than the fiction that's presented in Downton. I mean, in my own family tree, I found a cook and gardener at a country house who went on to have 10 children and sort of dragged them around the country to different country houses. So I think it's important to find out real-life stories as well.
I was going to read this quote to you, which I told Nabila I was going to do. Creator Julian Fellows said this: "The real problem is with people who are insecure socially," this is of critics, "and they think to show how smart they are by picking holes in the programme to promote their own poshness and to show that their knowledge is greater than your knowledge."
Well, personally, I'm very proud of my working class roots, and I would take the opposite view to Julian Fellows and say that perhaps if he dug into a few more real-life accounts and historical books, he might find some more interesting stories and make Downton a bit more vibrant.
Right, so you'd have given the Golden Globes to something else?
Yeah.
I sense that. On that note, Jennifer, thank you very much for coming in. Nabila, thank you for being a part of the programme today. Simon, thank you very much for joining us from Paris.
Thanks.
And enjoy the Africa Cup of Nations, as I no doubt you will over the next few weeks.
Quite.
And thank you for listening to this edition of The World Today. Stay tuned to the BBC World Service for our news headlines and plenty more, and join me at the same time tomorrow, if you can.